My name is Paloma Reyes, and for as long as I can remember, silence was the only language that kept peace in my family. I learned early that speaking up only made the room colder, my father's eyes sharper, and my mother's hands tremble as she tried to hold the world together between us. So I stayed quiet, through the insults dressed as lessons, through the years of being the disappointment that refused to break. I thought if I worked harder, if I made myself small enough, he would finally see me. He never did, and somewhere between his pride and my restraint, something in me finally cracked. I realized I was done earning a love that came with conditions, done swallowing the guilt that was never mine to carry. That morning in court, when he raised his voice and called me a disgrace, I didn't argue. I just looked at him and knew. The man who had spent his life trying to control my story was about to lose the ending. The air inside the San Diego County Courthouse felt heavy, thick with the smell of old wood and dust stirred by the morning light slanting through tall windows. A crowd filled the benches, neighbors, reporters, strangers who came to see a family destroy itself in public. My father stood at the front, trembling slightly, his gray hair catching the light as he raised his voice. "She's a disgrace! She manipulated her mother, tricked her into changing the will." The words sliced through the room like a blade. Every syllable carried the weight of years he'd spent mistaking control for love. I stood still, hands clasped before me, dressed in a plain black suit. The only color was the small gold anchor pinned to my collar, catching a flicker of sunlight before fading back into shadow. Across from him, Judge Elaine Wexler watched in silence. Her expression was unreadable, her presence calm but sharp. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, yet clear enough to silence the entire room. "Sir, you really don't know, do you?" The murmur died instantly. My father froze, confusion twisting his face as if she'd just spoken in a language he could no longer understand. The judge's pen scratched across paper. The clock ticked. My heartbeat followed both rhythms. People think moments like this happen in an instant. They don't. They're built over years, word by word, silence by silence. And as I looked at him, at the man who once taught me how to stand tall, I understood. This wasn't where the story began. It began long before the courtroom, in a house where I learned that survival sometimes meant staying quiet long enough to remember your own voice. National City had aged the same way I had. Quietly, stubbornly, beneath the weight of time. The streets were still lined with fading stucco houses, their walls cracked like old scars. My childhood home waited at the end of the block, its paint peeling, its windows clouded with dust. Inside, the air was stale and heavy with the faint scent of cheap whiskey. The ceiling fan moaned as it turned, the sound slow and uneven, like the breath of something too tired to live, but not yet ready to die. Almost a year had passed since my mother's funeral. Lucia Reyes taught children how to speak 2 languages, but somehow she could never teach this family how to listen. She once told me that respect wasn't about agreement. It was about standing upright when someone tried to bend you. She said it softly, never realizing that one day I'd have to live by those words against the man she married. My father had been a border officer, once respected, now reduced to bitterness. His pride curdled into resentment the moment the world stopped saluting him. Every time he looked at me, I saw the same accusation in his eyes, that I had inherited the government that used him up and threw him away. The house hadn't moved on. Her photo hung askew on the altar, her smile dulled by a thin film of dust. I straightened the frame and opened the drawer beneath it, the one where she kept old letters. Buried among folded papers was an envelope marked in her shaky handwriting, "To Paloma, if your father turns on you, remember this. Truth doesn't ask for permission." The ink at the bottom bled into the paper. I held it tight, throat burning. She must have known this day would come, that he would take his grief and turn it into a weapon. A car door slammed outside. My brother, Mateo, walked up the path, shirt stained with oil, eyes soft and careful. He hugged me like he always did, half-hearted, afraid of breaking something. "Dad's been Different, he said. He always was. I answered, later. I stepped onto the porch, across the fence. My father stood with a bottle in hand, watching but saying nothing. I could feel his stare like heat on my skin. When he finally turned away, the air seemed to close around me again, thick with everything we'd never said. He would never forgive me for leaving this place, for choosing duty over blood, for being everything he could not control. The next morning, I found Mateo at his shop. The air smelled of gasoline and metal, the hum of a half-fixed engine echoing through the room. He was wiping grease from his hands, eyes fixed on the floor. He filed it, didn't he? Yeah, he said quietly. He thinks you used your position to twist Mom's will. He really believes it. I leaned against the workbench, keeping my voice steady. Who's representing him? Navarro. That name cut deeper than I expected. Hector Navarro, the same attorney I'd once investigated for corruption. I'd watched him lose his contracts, his reputation, everything, and now he was back, representing my father, wearing revenge like a suit. He's not defending Dad, I said. He's coming for me. Mateo shook his head. He's your father, Paloma. Maybe you should talk to him. And say what? That truth doesn't need permission? He didn't answer. Maybe because he knew it was already too late for talking. That night, back in my old room, I sat by the window. The ocean murmured beyond the city, the air tasting of salt and rust. I unfolded my mother's letter again, tracing the words with my fingertips until they blurred. You were right. Mama. He's turning against me. My phone buzzed. A message from Mateo. Dad's hired Navarro. They've already filed to disqualify your legal license in court. I set the phone down and stared at the small gold insignia on my desk. The anchor glimmered faintly under the moonlight, a reminder of everything I'd stood for. The very truth that had once protected me would now be used to tear me apart. Still, I drew a deep breath and steadied my hands. Whatever they thought they were building. They had no idea what kind of storm comes when truth finally decides to speak. The courthouse felt colder that morning, though sunlight still poured through the high windows, slicing across the polished floor. I walked in quietly, dressed in a black suit, hair tied back, no uniform, no armor, just composure. Navarro was already there, pacing with the confidence of a man rehearsing his victory. My father sat beside him, back straight, jaw tight, wearing his old authority like a badge that no one else could see. Behind them, Mateo stared at the floor, his silence louder than any defense. When the session began, Navarro's voice filled the room, low, smooth, deliberate, every syllable shaped to cut. We are here, he declared, because this woman, this so-called daughter, used her government position to manipulate her dying mother into changing her will. The words landed like knives, clean and cold. I kept my gaze steady, hands folded in my lap, my pulse the only thing moving. He went on, relentless. She barely visited her mother, and when she did, she came in uniform, full of medals, showing off her status. He played a recording, my voice over the phone saying, I'll take care of it, cut against my mother's weak reply. I'm tired. Paloma! A murmur rippled through the crowd. That recording, its tone, the static, the background hum. I knew it. It came from the military hospital's restricted records, files accessible only to the Navy or family. Navarro had broken federal privacy law to use it. The motive was obvious. This wasn't justice, it was revenge. Judge Wexler tapped her gavel once. Order. Then she looked at me. Ms. Reyes, do you wish to respond? I stood. My voice was calm. Not yet. Your Honor, the truth doesn't need my defense. Gasps followed. I sat again. Navarro's smile faltered. He'd expected me to break. Instead, I gave him nothing but silence, the kind that made men like him nervous. By the end of the session, Wexler's tone shifted. Ms. Reyes, please submit your service file for verification. A simple sentence, but it meant my entire record. Classified missions, investigations, everything, would become part of the court file. As I left the courtroom, my father stepped into my path. His eyes burned with that familiar contempt. "You think your medals make you better than blood?" I met his gaze. "No. They remind me I survived it." That night, my phone buzzed. A message from Naval Command. "We are aware the court requested your file. Clearance under Section 14 may expose classified operations. Proceed with caution." I typed my reply slowly, without hesitation. Approve release. I stand by everything I've done. The city outside my apartment was quiet that night. The kind of stillness that hums before something breaks. A single streetlight spilled across my desk, catching on the small gold insignia resting there. I poured coffee but never drank it. My mother used to say, "La verdad no grita." "Mija, truth doesn't need to scream." I closed my eyes and heard her voice, soft and steady. The same tone she used when patching the cracks my father left behind. By morning, the Navy courier arrived with a sealed envelope stamped "Confidential, JAG Corps." I knew what waited inside. Every commendation, every line of testimony, every page from the case that had ruined Hector Navarro. As I flipped through, my breath caught. The judge who'd signed the original ruling 5 years ago, Elaine Wexler, the same woman presiding over my father's case now. In court, Wexler read through the documents, her brow tightening slightly, but her expression composed. Navarro's confidence began to splinter. He spoke louder, almost desperate. "Your Honor, are we really allowing her to parade her record as character evidence?" Wexler's voice cut clean through the tension. "It's not character evidence, Mr. Navarro. It's context." Then, calm but firm, she requested his previous bar records for review, citing relevance to the court's integrity. His face drained of color. He knew she'd recognized the past he was hoping to bury. After adjournment, I stepped into the corridor. Mateo caught up to me, worry written all over him. "Paloma, Dad's furious. He says you're trying to humiliate him. He's already doing that himself," I said, walking past him toward the light spilling through the courthouse doors. That evening, I sat again at my mother's letter, the one I'd read too many times. Beneath her familiar handwriting, I noticed something faint, scribbled at the bottom. Words I hadn't seen before, added in haste. "Justice will hurt, but peace will heal." For the first time in months, I smiled, not out of victory, but recognition. The fight wasn't over, but I could feel her presence in every quiet beat of my pulse, in the steady rhythm of my breath. The silence she once taught me to survive with had become something sharper, something stronger. It was no longer the silence of endurance. It was the silence before a truth too powerful to be denied. By morning, the courthouse was overflowing. Reporters crowded the steps, cameras flashing as I walked through the noise. The headline on a discarded paper read, "Navy lawyer faces her own father in court." I looked at it once, then kept walking. This wasn't a trial anymore. It was a public dissection of a family. Inside, my father sat beside Navarro, his eyes bright with stubborn conviction. Navarro's voice cut through the room, sharp and rehearsed, as he called Mateo to the stand. My brother hesitated when asked if I'd visited our mother often. Not as much as she wanted to. Navarro twisted it into not much, letting it hang like proof. My father nodded, satisfied. When it was my turn, Judge Wexler asked if I wanted to cross-examine. I shook my head. "No, Your Honor. He's already torn enough." The room went silent. Navarro displayed a photo, me in uniform, holding a glass at a ceremony. While her mother was dying, he said, she was celebrating. My father whispered, "See? Proof." Wexler studied him coldly. "Was this authenticated?" "It's public," he stammered. "Then it's irrelevant. You're selling shame, not truth." Later, she requested the Navy's Section 14 file. When she returned, her face was unreadable. "Mr. Navarro," she said, "do you wish to address your prior disciplinary record with the Department of Defense?" The room erupted. Navarro paled. My father turned, stunned. You didn't tell me this. Navarro's silence answered everything. Outside, Mateo found me sitting on a bench. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said. I know, I whispered. But you did. The wind tore a newspaper across my feet. The headline ripped clean in half. Father landing by my shoe, lawyer flying away. I watched it drift down the street and thought, maybe that was the truth of it. I could only be one at a time. That night, I found my father at the small bar in Chula Vista. The place smelled of tequila and regret. He didn't look up. You think that badge makes you better? You wear it like armor. Maybe armor's what daughters of men like you need, I said. He laughed. Hollow. Peace is for cowards. Then maybe I'm done being brave. I left without turning back. His voice followed softly, almost fragile. You sound just like her. The next day, Wexler's voice filled the courtroom again. Investigation, led by Lut, C.D. Paloma Reyes, resulted in disciplinary action against attorney Hector Navarro for fraud and misconduct. The silence that followed was absolute. My father turned toward Navarro, disbelief cracking his face. You used me. By the time the gavel struck, something inside him had broken, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger, only the faint beginning of release. The courtroom was overflowing that morning, flashes bursting as I walked in. Someone whispered, "That's her," the Navy lawyer suing her dad. My father sat at the front, shoulders stiff, hands trembling. Navarro looked drained, the color gone from his face. Mateo lingered behind them, eyes fixed on the floor. When the session began, Navarro's voice sliced through the silence. Your Honor, regardless of the Navy's politics, the fact remains. Miss Reyes exploited her dying mother for financial gain. The crowd stirred. I didn't move. Judge Wexler rested her hand on the Navy-sealed folder. Her voice dropped, calm but sharp. Mr. Navarro, before you continue, I'd like to clarify something. This file includes your name. Navarro blinked. Excuse me? Hector Navarro, disbarred in 2016 for ethical misconduct. Reinstated in 2019 after probation. Case handled by Lieutenant Commander Paloma Reyes, United States Navy JAG Corps. Gasps filled the room. My father turned, pale. You lied to me. Wexler's gaze fixed on him. Sir, you really don't know, do you? Your daughter has served this country for 12 years, defending families, sailors, and men like you. The record shows her mother's will was valid. Her intentions clear. She closed the file. The person embarrassing this family is not her. The gavel fell. Case dismissed. Light hit my collar. And for once, it felt like justice finally had a name. That afternoon, I drove back to the old house in National City. The street was quiet, the air still. Inside, the house no longer smelled of whiskey, only dust and sunlight spilling through the blinds, painting soft lines across the faded wedding photo of my parents. I walked to my mother's vanity, the one she used to keep her letters. The drawer stuck for a moment before giving way, releasing the faint scent of old paper. Beneath a pile of envelopes, I found one sealed tight, thick and yellowed with age. On the front, in her careful handwriting, was a single word, Miguel. I opened it slowly. Her handwriting trembled across the page. If you ever see her stand where you couldn't, don't feel small. Miguel, feel proud. Because she did what we both dreamed of. She became free. The seal had never been broken. He'd never read it. The realization stung more than I expected. I sat on the edge of the bed, the late light warming my hands, and heard her voice again in my head. Peace isn't what you find in others, mija. It's what you stop fighting inside yourself. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I opened the door to find my father standing there, wearing a worn shirt and holding his hat like it weighed a ton. His eyes were cloudy, but the anger was gone. You left this behind, he said, handing me a small box. Inside was my mother's wedding ring. We stood there for a long moment before I stepped aside and let him in. The air felt heavy with everything we'd never said. He looked around the room, then whispered, "I don't deserve forgiveness." "That's true," I said quietly. "But I deserve peace." For the first time in my life, I saw him cry. No apology, no embrace, just the quiet breaking of two people who had finally run out of anger. We sat by the window, listening to the wind move through the trees. I placed my mother's ring on the table between us. It belonged to neither of us anymore. It was simply what remained of everything we once were. A week later, I drove my father to Sunset Cliffs, the place where my mother used to watch the sea. The morning was clear, the wind sharp with salt. Waves struck the rocks below, sending mist into the air like breath from the ocean itself. We stood at the edge, the urn in my hands cool against my palms. When we released her ashes, the wind caught them, spinning them into a thin silver ribbon before the sea took them away. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of loss, only movement, soft and endless. My father's voice broke through the wind, rough but steady. "I didn't raise you, Paloma. You raised yourself." I turned toward him and smiled faintly. "Maybe that's how I learned to stand." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. We stood there in silence, the kind that no longer hurt. I didn't feel anger or pity, just lightness, as if I had finally stepped out of a war I'd been fighting all my life. The wind lifted the corner of my jacket, sunlight glinting off the small JAG insignia on my collar. I touched it gently and whispered to her in my heart. I kept my promise. I chose peace. When we turned to leave, my father placed a hand on my shoulder, awkward, unsure, but real. A wave crashed hard against the cliff, foam bursting into the air, and I heard it. The sound of peace, steady, unjudging, alive. As I walked toward the sun, I didn't look back. The ocean kept speaking behind me, quiet and eternal, as if it carried my mother's voice, justice, and the calm I had spent a lifetime trying to find.